Okay, I've got this barn here that I used to own out in Illinois. It was kind of haunted and creepy, but that's another story. What I did was I added in some 3D text, which is very simple, pretty fast and easy to do. If you're wanting to try it, this video will show you how to do it real fast. So you see my footage of the barn is pretty darn shaky. I did that on purpose because I wanted to use it in my classes and stuff. So what I want to do is I'm not going to stabilize it yet. I'll probably do that as the last pass. But first I want to just stick some text on here. I want to add in a 3D tracker camera. Let me show you how you do that. So I'm going to pause it, I'm going to right click it, and I'm going to go to track and stabilize and add on a track camera over here. It's going to analyze it for a little while, and you can actually go and work on something else if you want while it's analyzing. Also, what it's doing is it's looking all over this for little points, like maybe in this X, basically any point that it thinks should be stable, and it's kind of analyzing it to see, what was my camera doing when I was shooting? How was my camera wiggling? So it's going to track these spots, and that will allow me to stabilize this footage. It'll allow me to add in things that look like they're stuck on the background, like I can add a for sale sign and stuff like that. So it's just about done analyzing. Now it's putting a camera in, basically. It's sort of solving for what my camera wiggled and what my camera did while I was hand holding it. And these are the points that it comes up with. The ones I may not want are these over here, which are in the tree. I would probably just lasso around these like this and delete these points because they're really not going to help me stabilize or really anything, because if there's a wind and the tree's moving, it might kind of mess up the stabilization. You don't really have to do this because honestly this thing is so accurate usually that you don't really need to worry about this too much. So if you're going to go around and delete all these points, which I don't think I really need to do in this case because this is not really moving very much, a couple of things that you might want to look at here. If things aren't working the way you want them, you might want to change under the Advanced tab here. You could turn it on to say, mostly flat scene, because this is really flat. There's not a lot of camera movement in here. Also, you could you want to make sure this auto delete points across time is turned on, which it is by default, and that will delete the points as you travel through the footage. Over here in 9 seconds, some of those dots will probably reappear, in which case you need to delete those out too. See how some of these back in the tree are starting to reappear as I go later in the footage. So you don't really necessarily need to do that if you could see that your target looks like it's pretty much flat with the environment. See, if I go down here on the floor, you can kind of see that the target is not really lined up anymore. And if I select a number of keys, the target appears might be a little bit slanted. You have to select about 3 points using Control, for example, in order to get a target to show up. So just find a spot on here where it looks like the target is flat with your building or whatever you're trying to track. Click it. It'll put the target on and kind of lock it in. See the 3 points it's using here to track? But I'm going to now right click that. And when I right click that, I have all these cool options here. I could add text and camera. I could add a solid in a camera. I could add a null in a camera. Text is really what I want to do now. Adding a null would allow me to attach like a for sale sign to it. I'll show you that probably later. So now I've added some text when I right clicked it. So I can move that text over and shrink it by clicking on the text that was created. I could hit anchor point, and I could actually kind of move the anchor point around and move the text around. That's kind of about the only time I ever use anchor point. Hardly ever in After Effects. Once in a while I do, but very rarely. So there I have kind of a decent text. Then I can also shrink the size of it. If I look at all the options under text, twirl that open here, I could change the scale and shrink it down a little bit, things like that. So this text should be stuck to the building. Let's see how it looks. You can also tilt it a little bit, which is kind of an important thing because you may want to tilt it in order to make the 3D look a little better. You could tilt it up, back, all different ways here. See, I can tilt it a little bit to the side. So then my 3D will show up better in a minute or two when I create it. I could even use this little gimbal here that's kind of a new thing. You can click it and roll it along the X-axis there. See that? Here's the Y-axis. I could click that and roll along that if I wanted to too. pull it like to the right or to the left. I'm going to undo that. You can also go into the Z axis and click on that, which is like tilting it like that. So this gimbal is kind of a good thing to play with and get used to. You can even click on the little green thing and pull it up, and it will kind of move it up or down in space. So play with that gimbal a little bit. It's pretty interesting and awesome new tool. I'm going to undo a bunch of that stuff. So now that I have this text in place, I want to make it extrude or kind of stick out the back, or basically be 3D text in a 2D world. So I have to use a 3D engine or 3D software to help me do that, which is included with After Effects. A lot of people don't realize, but underneath File, New, you can actually start Max on Cinema-4D file, and it will open up Cinema-4D for you. It has some limitations, but not very many. You can actually make some really cool stuff with it, and it's free, so go check that out when you're ready too. But what it's going to do is, instead of using my regular rendering engine on this computer, it's going to want to use the Cinema-4D engine, and that's the things you can change are under geometry options right here. So if this is grayed out like it is right now and there's no options under here, that's because it's not turned on properly. So let's go to Composition, Settings. This is just this particular composition. And what you need to do is you need to look here, not basic, not advanced, but under 3D renderer. See, I've got it set on classic 3D, but there's this cool drop down here which allows me to do Cinema-4D. So I'll click on that, and then all of a sudden all these things that are enabled show up. This shows you what's disabled because you haven't bought the right version yet, and you kind of just are using the free version, which is dumbed down a little bit. But still, there's a lot of awesome things you can do in here. So let's hit OK. And now this text is ready to be extruded, or made deep is probably a better way to describe it. So I am going to go down here to extrusion depth, and let's type in something like 60 on it. So you can see it got deeper, but it's way ugly. You can't really see it very well. That's because anything that is a 3D object needs a light put in there. I'm going to save this so it doesn't crash. I recommend saving it a lot because it tends to crash when you're doing these weird things that you don't do every day that haven't been tested for 20 years in After Effects. So what you need to do to get this to light up a little bit is actually add some lights in here. So I'm going to go under Layer, New Light, and I'm going to add a couple different kinds of lights that are very helpful. One is a spotlight, and you can kind of make it color toned or whatever. If you want to make it look like a kind of a sickly, foggy day or whatever, you can put a little color in your light. So what I'll do is I'll put a spotlight on, which is pretty good about shining at what you want it to shine at, like the text. I may want to turn up some of these other numbers in a minute, but let's put that in. And I actually might even, you could even change the name up here if you want. I'm not going to do that. I don't necessarily need to do that. So it didn't really do a darn thing. That's probably because it's all screwed up in space. It really needs to be pulled out away from the text. It's barely lighting it up. See that? So I'm going to get my little gimbal thing here and maybe raise it up a little bit with the Y. And see, there's this little pointer right here that kind of shows you where the light is pointing at. So you could get that and sort of drag it back so that it's hitting your text again. That's sort of its point of focus. And then I also want to pull it out in Z space, because that's really where you can start seeing the effect of this light. See how I found the Z, and then I'm sort of pulling it upward, which would pull it out according to that gimbal thing. And there it is. It's starting to light up pretty nicely. Let me get the point of focus back onto the text again. And this kind of shows you over here what it looks like too. This is the front, but we could look at the top here by clicking on this and changing it from front to top, for example. And that shows you like where my text is in space and how I twisted it a little bit. It also shows you where my light is. So I can get in here again and find that Z. So if you see, instead of grabbing the little circle gimbal thing, I'm going to grab this little pointer here, and that will pull it in or pull it out a little bit. And I think pulling it out would be better because it will light it up a little better. I also might want to control this, kind of point it where it's aiming and aim it a little more at the text. So it's starting to light up pretty well here. So I've got my little spotlight. Let's tweak some of the little things we can change on it here. You could, of course, animate that light by turning on all these stopwatches and have it move around in space. You could change all these things. So that light could fly around and make things light up in various ways. I think I might go under light options and turn up the intensity here so that it's a little bit brighter on my text. See how it's starting to light up a little bit more? Let's turn that up to 400 even. Now it's starting to burn the text in nicely. I like that. Turn it back down a little bit. Change the color, change the angle, change the feather, all these kinds of things. So once again, I've got it pointed basically at the right thing, but a little bit too high. So I might bring this back down again so that the point of focus focuses more on my text again. So now that I got the text lit up okay, I might add one more type of light, which is an ambient light. Under Layer, New Light. An ambient light is just sort of like light that bounces around the room, very soft light with no direction. It just kind of generally fills the atmosphere. So we'll do that, turn down the intensity, up the intensity, whatever we need to do. So it's sort of lighting up everything. Let me just turn it down a little bit here. Under Light Options, Intensity, let's put it down to 70. That's looking pretty good. Might go a little bit lower on that. So let's just generally fill in the shadows and make it look a little more evenly lit throughout. A couple other things I might want to do on the text is I like it when I add a little deeper bevel to it. That's the kind of area around the edges that catch the light. Let me see if I can show that to you. So there's different kinds of bevels. I'm going to put like a 6 depth on it, and then let's look through the different kinds of bevels. Here's angular, so that's a 6 pixel angular bevel. Do you see how that looks right there? It's kind of cool the way it catches the light. Maybe we should turn that down to about 3. So now you have a little subtle bevel on there that's creating some nice looks. There's also concave, which looks a little more sucked in around the edge, and convex, which pokes it out slightly like a little bit of a bubbled edge. I like this angular because it will catch light and look pretty cool if I have a light sweeping through, and I've got about a 3 depth on it. So that's how you can make some text here in After Effects. You can also now add some other things. So let me zoom out here from 400% back into fit up to 100%, and this is what I'm getting so far. I think it's looking pretty good. I could probably change the light so it focuses more on this side tube, but let's see if it's attached to the barn properly. Okay, so my text is pretty well stuck to that barn no matter how much it shakes and wiggles it around. It looks pretty nice. So that's one cool way of sticking 3D text in there. Now you can move the text and change the orientation. You could sweep a little bright light across it. You can add some effects on it. Okay, so if I got this text tracking pretty well now, let's turn it off and let's turn on, I'll even turn off the 2 lights for a minute here. Let's try to do the same thing we did earlier. I'm going to click on the stabilize, I'm going to click on the effects or hit E, and there's the 3D tracker, and as soon as I click on it, all my little dots show up again. Let's add a sign or something to this. So once again, I'm going to try to find a really good flat place that looks pretty similar to what's on the barn itself. I might even use, see how if you get just the wrong ones, it could twist it. See how that twisted? So you got to kind of make sure you get ones that are logical here. So I'm going to click, which will make a nice little 3-point target for me. I'm going to right click that, and instead of adding text, and instead of adding a solid, which would just be like a color solid that you could cut out with a mask or something like that, or put something on it or attach something to it, I'll do this one because it's easy enough to attach something to that too. So create a null, and now there's my null. Let's see if it tracks pretty well. Well, we won't be able to see if it tracks very well because it disappears when you hit play. So it is up in there somewhere. So let's click on the null, and now I'm going to bring a sign in and stick it on the barn, like maybe over here somewhere. Okay, so I'm going to pull in this old sign here, bring that into After Effects, drag it in, take this, set it on top of everything here. Probably instead of using a mask tool, I'll just use Effect, Key, Color Key, or Color Range. And then I'll just get my little eyedropper and select the white and try to get rid of the white that way. That's already looking pretty good. So I zoomed in on it, I turned the fuzziness off and back up until I can't really see any more white stuff around it. It's looking pretty good. Let me stick it to the null now. I'm going to put it back into fit up to 100%. One thing I could do is just move it to where I want it to start. You know, back here in the beginning, I would probably put it at the very first frame. I'll put V in order to select it. I'll click on it. I'll stick it over here into the barn area. I'll hit S for scale. All these shortcuts sure makes things a lot easier. And then I'll use my shift arrow keys to kind of get it into position. I don't really like how it's not sitting straight on the barn, so I might hit Z and zoom in on it a little bit more and then give it a little bit of a twist here. That would be under R for rotate. I'll say rotate it like 2 degrees, just a little bit. Nice. Now I'm ready to attach that to the null. I may have to tweak it again because as soon as I turn it on, there's going to be a problem that I'm going to show you. So I will take this image, which is the open sign, and I'll grab its pick whip here, that little stretchy pick whip thing that I love, and I'll attach that to the null. And you'd think that would work right outright, and it's kind of funny because I thought for sure that was just going to work. And sometimes it may, but in this case it doesn't. See how it's not sticking to the barn? Now it took me a while to figure out why that wasn't happening. It kind of freaked me out. I was like, what the crap? It should be sticking. I parented it to the null, and the null is moving around. What's the story? Well, the story is that the null here is actually a 3D object. So in order to make the sign stick to the null, it also has to be a 3D object. That totally threw me for a little bit. So I'm going to turn that on. And now, you know, I told you a second ago I probably have to reposition it. Well, sure enough, I do. I'll hit V in order to move it. I'll start moving it around a little bit. Here's the X-axis. Here is the Y-axis. I'll click that little arrow and bring it down. Just use my arrow keys to get it positioned nicely. And then I'll probably hit S for scale again. And now I really do need to turn it down a little bit to make it look a little better. So it's starting to get there. Now let's see if it's stuck now that I've turned it on as a 3D object and repositioned it. Here we go. But here it is now that it's all green on the bottom and all rendered. This is what it will actually look like. It's pretty good. It's drifting a little bit when my camera went crazy with shake, but overall it looks pretty good. I might turn the saturation down a little bit and maybe put a little bit of motion blur or Gaussian blur on it. It's funny that a lot of times what you're trying to do in After Effects is make something that looks really good look crappier so that it matches the original. So I'm going to go under Effects, Color Correction, and I always like this symmetry color because it gives you pretty much any option you'd ever want. So for basic correction, I would probably do something like turning down the saturation a little on this because it's awfully yellow. It's kind of pulling focus. So now it's a lot less saturated. It doesn't look very real because the camera's wiggling so much that a lot of things are going out of focus. So we might want to put something like camera lens blur on it, or just Gaussian blur, just a little bit of blur on there. And let's hit play and see how that looks. So it looks pretty good. It's not too bad. I could tilt it a little bit. When it really gets shaking, it can fall off a little bit. So one thing that might help that drifting is if I go through and get rid of any of those tracking points that are up there in the trees like we talked about, because that would narrow it in on tracking the barn and it would not account for all the trees and stuff. So that's probably the next thing I would do, is go back in and eliminate needless tracking points. So when I turned on the text and the lights, it made my sign freak out a little bit in terms of brightness because there's too much light hitting it. So I can just go down under material options for that little sign, and I could turn off accepts lights. See this right here? Accepts lights. I could turn that off. Now see how it went back to a regular color? Here it is with it on, and it's accepting all the lights, and here it is off. So that's another cool thing you can do, is control what casts shadows, what kind of things are shadows can hit, what kind of things will light up or not, based on what you want the lights to do. So it would probably be best to export your stabilized footage in pretty high quality without any compression or much compression on it, bring it back into After Effects, then do the 3D tracking on it, and then right-click your little target and add your text. Turn on your Cinema-4D render engine, which will allow the text to become 3D, which will allow you to extrude it and create some depth, which will allow it to be hit by lights. You can add that little bevel in, and then everything can be animated. Add a spotlight in and an ambient light, at least, maybe even more. Turn up their intensities, pull them up a little higher. A lot of cool things you can do with this, so I hope you'll check it out and have some fun with it.